The sun, a colossal flaming ball of gas that serves as the lifeblood of our solar system. Its bright light and immense heat energize our planet, making life possible. From driving photosynthesis in plants to regulating our climate, the sun's influence reaches far and wide, nurturing and sustaining the delicate balance of life on Earth. Now, imagine a world where night has never existed, and the sun's radiant glow reigns supreme, casting its golden light across the landscape without end. In this realm of perpetual daylight, midnight is a myth, and the tranquil embrace of darkness is unknown. Plants thriving under the constant sunlight would grow unchecked, transforming forests into verdant jungles. The natural rhythms of life would be forever altered as humans and Pokemon adapt to a life without rest, and their bodies and minds yearning for a reprieve that never comes. In this ceaseless day, the Earth would be a land of unending energy and motion, forever basking in the sun's eternal embrace. This is the region of Hoenn. In Gen 3 Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald. In ORAS, we actually did have the day-night cycle, but in the Gen 3 games, the beloved day-night cycle from the Gen 2 era was totally removed, and all of us Hoenn babies were totally deprived of the idea and the experience of nighttime. We were totally deprived of the ability to capture Pokemon depending on the time of day, which was a mechanic that seemed like so ingrained into the very fabric of Pokemon Gold, Silver, and Crystal that its removal was nearly inconceivable at the time. And I think that this should have never occurred. So today I'll be discussing how exactly Pokemon would be encountered if Hoenn actually did have a day-night cycle in the Gen 3 games and actually had real functionality in the Gen 6 games. And many of you may have seen my poll where I asked all of you which video did you want to see first, the day-night cycle Pokemon encounters video or the Hoenn Pokedex revamp overhaul video, and this video won, but don't worry, you're still getting both. That video will be right up next after this one. So y'all better stay tuned, don't be clicking away and whatnot. Anyway, I'm Sabrina and you're watching Saffron City TV. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Okay, so some of you may be too young to remember, or some of you just may not have had this specific experience, but back in ye olden days, the day-night cycle was actually quite a coveted mechanic. I recall it being particularly disappointing for all of us elderly folk who remember playing Pokemon Gold, Silver, and Crystal prior to the release of the Gen 3 titles. Gen 2 GSC improved upon so many of the aspects of the Gen 1 titles that it kind of felt like we could only really go up from there. We all thought that the next title that was going to come out after Pokemon Gold, Silver, and Crystal was going to have all of the things that Gold, Silver, and Crystal had, but improved upon like tenfold. But when we opened up our Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire and Emerald boxes and snapped the cartridge into the back of the Game Boy Advance or the SP, I think I speak for all of us when I say that I think collectively we were all a little bit shooketh when 6 p.m. rolled around and the color temperature of the screen did not change to darken to indicate that it was now nighttime in the games. None of the Pokemon encounters changed. You couldn't really ever check to see what time it was unless you like went back home to check the analog clock that you set at the beginning of the game. And it just felt very anticlimactic to not be able to experience the day-night cycle literally at all.
I had a reason.
What was the reason?
I had a reason.
What was the reason?
I had a reason.
What was the reason?
I just explained the reason.
What was the reason, bitch?
I don't need to explain myself to you. And
What was the reason?
I personally was particularly disappointed because I really loved the day-night cycle. I could have swore that it was going to be in the next games, and when it wasn't, it kind of felt like we were taking a step back, and it made me kind of sad at the time. I remember feeling like, maybe I should go back and play Pokemon Gold, Silver, and Crystal a little bit more, because there were things in those games that felt like they weren't gonna exist anymore, and we were kind of worried that we were never gonna get them back. Or at least I was. I don't know about y'all. If you're familiar with my channel, then you may have watched my last video, the Hoenn Region Repair. In that series, I focus on changing aspects about the region in order to make the region essentially what I personally would deem to be perfect. I go through every single category that I covered in the region review and make changes to fix the region's issues. One of the major issues that I had with the region of Hoenn is that in the Gen 3 titles, the day-night cycle didn't exist, and in Gen 6, the day-night cycle just really didn't serve much of a purpose at all, and I suggested that this be changed. And I basically covered all of the other aspects about how time would work in the Hoenn region. The only thing about the day-night cycle that I didn't cover in that video specifically is the Pokemon encounters, because it was going to be basically like I needed to make a whole new video for that, and that's what this video right here is. And if you'd like to see all of the other changes that I made to the region of Hoenn with regards to time and how time mechanics would work and what about the region would change if time played a major role in the region, you should check out the Hoenn Region Repair video. It'll be linked up at the top of the screen now, and it'll be at the end of the video as well. So do go check that out. But after this video, stay here. Don't leave. Oh. Okay, anyway. So today the big question is, if Hoenn had a day-night cycle and it served a function as far as Pokemon encounters are concerned, how would the Pokemon encounters work in Hoenn? Anyway, let's talk about it, shall we? First things first, I will only be considering Pokemon encounters for the day-night cycle that can already be encountered in the region of Hoenn during a standard playthrough up to entering the Hall of Fame. So you won't be seeing any new additions in this video, only Pokemon from the current Hoenn Pokédex. Not even the National Dex. I am going to be making the Hoenn Pokédex overhaul video next, but I don't want that video to be directly tied to this video. I want both of these videos to stand on their own so that nobody has to go watch an entirely separate video to understand the context for the one they currently want to watch right now. That system might work for the Region Repair series because those videos do kind of stand on their own, but that doesn't really work in this case, so don't argue with me. I don't want to make people watch the Hoenn Pokédex overhaul video in order to enjoy the day-night cycle Pokemon encounters video, okay? I just don't want to, okay? So y'all try to enjoy this video for what it is. An opinion piece on which Pokemon would appear around the region at different times of the day if Game Freak had included a day-night cycle in Hoenn. And while Gen 3 Hoenn does not have a day-night cycle or a visually apparent indication of time, Gen 6 Hoenn actually does. ORAS does have a day-night cycle, it just doesn't really have much functionality outside of being able to encounter some legendaries and adding some aesthetic flair to the region and kind of dictating when the rooftop sale in Lily Cove occurs. And I actually find this to be quite a disappointment because the potential for Pokemon encounters to be based on the time of day like they did in Gen 2 and in Gen 4 was there. Game Freak simply didn't capitalize on it. And quite frankly, it could have been implemented in the Gen 3 games as well. I mean, you were already able to set the time of day and the day of the week manually at the beginning of your game in Gold, Silver, and Crystal, so it absolutely could have been done for the Hoenn games. However, in later titles, this mechanic changed to be based on the time set on the Nintendo DS or 3DS clock. This is essentially how ORAS already operates. In Gen 2, the time of day was split up into 3 separate sections: morning, day, and night. However, Gen 6 added an additional time of day to the mix. In Gen 6, morning occurs between 4 a.m. and 10:59 a.m. Daytime is between 11 a.m. and 5:59 p.m., and the newly implemented evening time occurs between 6 p.m. and 8:59 p.m., and night is between 9 p.m. and 3:59 a.m. When discussing the day-night cycle for Hoenn, I will consider the Gen 3 games to also include that 3-hour window of evening time that was implemented in the Gen 6 games. In addition, if I decide that a Pokemon should get an increased encounter rate, that implies that other Pokemon that are found in the same locations would have their encounter rates changed as well. But I won't be discussing them. That would take an eternity. So just assume that if the Pokemon I'm talking about gets an increased encounter rate, the other Pokemon in the same area would have a decreased or altered encounter rate. So now the big question is, which Pokemon would appear at which times of the day? I'm only going to be discussing the Pokemon that will have their encounter rates changed based on the time of the day. And any Pokemon not mentioned in this video are assumed to maintain their current appearance rates, and I guess would be encounterable at all hours of the day. Capiche? And for the sake of this video, let's just assume that, like, version exclusive content doesn't exist and that all Hoenn Pokemon can be found in every version of the game, because I am not going to sit here and split hairs about which Pokemon would be found in which version at which time of the day and if it's going to be different between Ruby, Sapphire. I'm not doing all that bull crap, okay? That's a load of bull honky that we're not going to do. So yeah, we're not delineating any version exclusive content. Any Pokemon that could be found in Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald are considered to be found across all 3 of the games, and this goes for ORAS as well. Anyway, let's get into those encounters, shall we? First things first, let's talk about the Zigzagoon line and the Poochyena line. I think Zigzagoon and Linoone should be available during the morning and the daytime, while Poochyena and Mightyena would be roaming the tall grass in the evening and at night. The latter two just seem like they would be night hounds, I don't know. Next, I think that Wurmple's evolution should change depending on the time of day, similar to how Eevee evolves into Espeon and Umbreon. I think it should be that if you evolve Wurmple during the daytime, it would change into a Silcoon and eventually into a Beautifly, but if you evolved it at nighttime, it would evolve into a Cascoon and eventually a Dustox. But I think that if you evolve it in the morning or in the evening, it could be kind of a 50-50 chance to get either or. That being said, Silcoon and Cascoon would also be found during those respective times of the day in the Petalburg Woods. For Ralts on Route 102, I think it can still be encountered at all times of the day with a 5% encounter rate, though I think it should be increased to a 30% encounter rate exclusively in the morning time. However, I think the opposite would be true for Slakoth and Nincada. I think these two should have a reduced encounter rate during the daytime, but then they'd have an increased encounter rate to about 40% during the nighttime, since sloths and nymph cicadas are naturally more active at night. That being said, adult cicadas, like those that Ninjask are based on, are most active during the daytime and in the evening. And while currently Ninjask cannot be encountered in the wild, I think it should be available on routes 118, 119, and 120 exclusively during the day and in the evening. Like Ralts, I think Skitty should have its very rare encounter rate of 5% on Route 116 increased to 30% at night and in the morning time. This is because this Pokemon uses a Moonstone to evolve, so I'd assume that this Pokemon would primarily be active at nighttime when the moon is out and, I don't know, maybe energizing this Pokemon. Sableye should be available exclusively in the evening and at night in Granite Cave, while Mawile should only be encountered exclusively during the morning and the daytime. One of my channel members, Malevolent Minun, commented on one of my videos that Volbeat in Illumise should be exclusive to nighttime since they're based on lightning bugs, which are most active and visible during the evening and at night. I agree, I say we should make that happen. However, I would also extend their appearances to routes 118, 119, and 120 as well. Though I also think that Roselia should be encountered with an increased rate of 50% in the morning on Route 117. But there is another Pokemon that I think should be available on this route, and that's Jigglypuff. Currently, this Pokemon is only available on Route 115, and you can only catch it by backtracking using Surf north of Rustboro and then to the northern part of the route. I think I'd really like to see Jigglypuff be available on Route 117 during the evening and at nighttime, though I'd make this apply to Route 115 as well. Some other Pokemon that I think should be more predominantly featured during the daytime would be the Fire-type Pokemon Numel, Slugma, and Torkoal. However, I have some thoughts about these Pokemon. I don't have an issue with Numel's distribution, though it does kind of bother me that Camerupt can't be encountered in the wild at all. I think Camerupt should be available on Jagged Pass with a low encounter rate, but only during the daytime. Slugma can be found on Route 113 exclusively in Emerald, but I'm not a huge fan of this concept. Slugma is literally pure lava that has to keep moving because if its body cools off even slightly, it will begin to harden according to its Pokedex entries. It's kind of like the brownie around the edges of the pan. Like you take it out of the oven and it looks nice and gooey and delicious all over, but once it sets out for like 3 minutes, the edges are like a solid wall of regret, and you can bet money that somebody is going to scrape the top of their mouth trying to eat a corner piece. I mean, that's kind of what Slugma would be like after sitting out for 3 minutes, but just don't attempt to eat it. I'd assume that a place like Route 113, which is full of tall grass and trees, is probably cool enough to sustain this type of plant life, but also cool enough to kill a Slugma. I think that this Pokemon should remain inside Fiery Path, considering that it's like pretty hot in there, and the Team Magma hideout on Jagged Pass, which literally has flowing lava within it. So it should be exclusive to those areas so that it can stay alive and whatnot. A Torkoal can remain in its current locations, smoking like a chimney and living its best life, but I would like to see this Pokemon be more active during the daytime. I believe Spoink should be exclusively found on Jagged Pass at night. Since Spoink needs to keep bouncing to stay alive, it makes sense for it to be active when other Pokemon are asleep, increasing its chances of survival without, bumping into anybody or falling over or something. I don't know. Additionally, this Pokemon just kind of looks like it would be more active at nighttime. This is not scientific. I'm just saying what I'm seeing, y'all, okay? Another Marsh Badge member, Silk Touch Ninja, had a great idea for Swablu. He suggested that Swablu be available on Route 120 in the morning. These little birds would be getting a nice cool bath in the large puddles on the route before traveling back to the other side of Mount Chimney for the remainder of the daytime. I think this is a super cute idea. Very cute. Thank you, Silk Touch Ninja, for the suggestion. Next up, I think that Trapinch and Cacnea should be evening and nighttime exclusive encounters. This is because Trapinch is based on the antlion, and they are primarily active at night. And while Cacnea is simply based on a cactus, this Pokemon's line, including Cacturne, are kinda spooky Pokemon that give me Scarecrow energy. I don't know, I just think this creepy cactus would be active at nighttime as well, and I suppose the Cacnea could still be encountered during the day, but its encounter rate would increase at nighttime. On the other hand, I think that Sandshrew, Sandslash, and Baltoy would be more active during the daytime, though I think it would be cool to see Nosepass in the desert as well, and I'd also like to expand the availability of Doduo and Dodrio to the desert, but only in the morning and during the daytime, with an encounter rate of 30% for Doduo and 5% for Dodrio. Zangoose and Seviper have long-lasting, well-known rivalry, and I think their encounter rates should reflect this. Zangoose should have a higher encounter rate of like 30% during the daytime, while you're less likely to encounter Seviper while the sun is out. And vice versa, at night you're more likely to come across a Seviper while Zangoose are less common. However, I think they should have an equal encounter rate of 20% during the morning and in the evening, and that's when the Clawfang War takes place, y'all. Solrock should be available exclusively during the day, and Lunatone should be available exclusively at nighttime. Call me Captain Obvious, but I feel like this is just a given right here. One of my members, the Tony458, suggested that Hoenn's Ghost Pokemon shouldn't be relegated exclusively to a specific time of day. He suggested a higher encounter rate for Shuppet during the daytime and an increased encounter rate for Duskull at night for some tag team hauntings. I think this is a really neat idea. You can never escape the ghosts, not even during the day. That's really spooky. Personally, I think Chimecho should be significantly more active during the daytime with higher encounter rates. Chimecho gets treated so poorly in these games. They're not particularly strong, they're unavailable until late in the mid-game, and they're only found in a single location at the peak of Mount Pyre with a low encounter rate of only 2% in Gen 3 and 5% in Gen 6. Yeesh, Game Freak really did not want to highlight Chimecho's debut. I actually love Chimecho and used one when I was a kid, and I truly adored this Pokemon. Its design is so cute and I love its concept. According to Chimecho's Pokedex entries, this Pokemon actually hangs from tree branches and the eaves of homes and buildings, but you never actually see it anywhere close to homes and buildings. It also supposedly travels by riding on winds, similar to Hoppip and other Pokemon, but Chimecho doesn't get the wide distribution that its Dex entries allude to. I think I'd really like to see this Pokemon on Route 121 near Lily Cove and Route 123 with an increased encounter rate of 15% in all of these locations, including Mount Pyre during the morning and in the daytime. In Gen 6, I think I'd really like to see Chingling be encountered in the wild on Mount Pyre's peak with like a 50% encounter rate, but only in the morning. Meditite, on the other hand, actually has a decent encounter rate on Mount Pyre's peak. Meditite is also available on Victory Road with a decent encounter rate, but only in Ruby and Sapphire. I think this Pokemon got done a little dirty here. Pokemon trainers all around the region use this Pokemon on their teams, but that would have to mean that all of these trainers either traveled all the way to Mount Pyre's peak or made it to Victory Road to catch this little cutie. But that doesn't quite seem right, considering the levels that Meditite is at while battling with these trainers. I'm sorry, is there some underground Meditite trafficking I'm unaware of? Is there some sort of black market breeding scheme I need to know about? This feels like some kind of Team Rocket scheme. And though this evil team isn't in Hoenn, if you let them shenan once, they'll shenan again. Maybe they've gone more covert, I don't know. I'm just making guesses here. However, I think in order to have all of this make sense in a world where I would like to believe that the good folk of Hoenn pay their taxes and don't purchase Meditite from black market dealers, yes, you are a lead suspect in this investigation, daycare lady. She just looks kind of shady, doesn't she? Then I'm just going to have to extend the distribution of Meditite across the region. And as a side note, for some reason, I don't know what convinced me to believe this, unless this is some Mandela effect madness, but I seriously used to believe that Meditite was available in Granite Cave. Y'all let me know if this Mandela effect applies to you as well, or if I was just a dumbass kid. Anyway, my confusion may be due to the fact that Meditite is actually numbered pretty early in the Pokedex, though I think that's just because Pokemon trainers in Brawly begin using them earlier in the game than where this Pokemon would normally be found. So, to justify all of the bullhonky I've just spewed, I'd like to actually make Meditite available in all of the games in Granite Cave, exclusively in the same room that Steven Stone can be found, with an encounter rate of 30% at all times of the day. I'd also like to see Meditite within Meteor Falls, with an encounter rate of 20% during all times of the day as well. As far as Mount Pyre is concerned, I think this Pokemon should only be available during the morning, daytime, and in the evening with its current encounter rate. I think I'd also like to see Vulpix get an increased encounter rate of 30% at nighttime at the peak of Mount Pyre, though I'd also like to see it appear exclusively at night on Jagged Pass with like a 15% encounter rate. I just think these cute little foxes should be available a little earlier in the games, don't you agree? Silk Touch Ninja also recommended that Absol be found exclusively at nighttime at the peak of Mount Pyre and removed from Route 20 entirely after the player has caught either Groudon and Kyogre and the natural disasters that they caused have ceased. I think this is an awesome idea, since this Pokemon rarely ventures down from the mountains and only does so to warn people of impending natural disasters. Once the monsoons and the harsh sunlight has subsided, I think it makes perfect sense for this Pokemon to return back to the mountains, and I think Mount Pyre is a perfect location for this Pokemon. Good thinking, Silk Touch Ninja. Next up, I think Tropius should be exclusive to the morning, daytime, and evening, since I imagine that this Pokemon isn't super active at nighttime. However, this Pokemon only has a low encounter rate of 9% in the Gen 3 games and 15% in ORAS. I think this should be increased to 30% for the morning and the daytime, and 15% in the evening. I always thought Tropius was a super cool Pokemon and really fit Hoenn perfectly. However, I feel like it just gets forgotten about a lot. Maybe that's because this Pokemon isn't particularly strong, but I had a lot of fun using one as a kid, and I wish it would have been more available. I think we should extend its availability to Route 120 as well. I would also like to see an increased encounter rate of 20% for Kecleon during the daytime as well. It's actually a bit of a shame that this Pokemon only has a 1 to 5% encounter rate in the locations it can currently be found in. I mean, I understand that this Pokemon is based on a chameleon, and I can understand why they might be more difficult to find, but still. When I was a kid, I didn't even know that you could catch Kecleon in the wild. I thought you could only catch the ones that you needed the Devinscope to encounter. So let's just increase that encounter rate during the daytime and make this Pokemon just a little more accessible to those who would like to use it. Of course, this would only be for a few hours during the day, so we're not totally negating this Pokemon's natural modus operandi. I also think Chinchou and Lantern should have an increased encounter rate at nighttime as well, and a decreased encounter rate during the daytime. Same thing with Staryu. This Pokemon should be much easier to encounter at nighttime. I think Luvdisc should have a higher encounter rate of like 40% in the mornings and in the evenings. This Pokemon is commonly sought after by young couples, and according to its Pokédex entries, people usually gift this Pokemon as an expression of love. And when are couples generally together the most? In the mornings and in the evenings. I just think it would be a cute little change. Finally, I'd like to discuss the Safari Zone real quick. I think Phanpy and Teddiursa should only be able to be encountered in the morning time, while Pokemon like Sunkern and Lediba should simply have an increased encounter rate in the morning. Girafarig, Pikachu, Doduo, Dodrio, Snubbull, Marill, and Mareep should be exclusive to the daytime and the evening, while others like Natu, Xatu, Stantler, Heracross, and Pinsir should have an increased encounter rate in the evening. I'd also like to see Hoothoot, Houndour, Spinarak, and Gligar be exclusive to nighttime. And that's it. That's how I would structure the Pokemon encounters for Hoenn if Hoenn had a day-night cycle in the Gen 3 games, and if the day-night cycle had functionality with regards to the Pokemon encounters in the Gen 6 games. What do you think about my ideas? Are there any Pokemon that I didn't mention that you think should have their encounter rates changed based on the time of the day? Leave me your comments down below, and if you liked this video, please be sure to leave me a little like. It helps promote my video, it helps get it out to other people that might be interested in this type of content, and it helps support the channel in a free way. And the other way that you can support the channel for free is by subscribing, and you should do that if you want to see more content like this from me, and hit the bell icon to be notified because I upload randomly for my mental health. Want to support the channel in other ways? You can consider buying me a cup of coffee or a cup of tea on Ko-fi, or consider earning your March badge today by becoming a member of the channel. And by doing so, you'll get some little extra cool, nifty little perks. Speaking of my members, I'd like to give a special thank you to Silk Touch Ninja, the Tony458, Malevolent Minun, Sakayo, Yoni42, and Secret Alice for supporting the channel. Y'all have earned your March badge and are extra snazzy folks who are helping me live the dream and keeping the channel spirits high. I'd also like to thank Alberto Porigato for buying me a cup of coffee or a tea on Ko-fi. Thank you so much for your support. I really appreciate it. Anyway, next up, I'm going to be doing a complete overhaul of the Hoenn Pokedex, so y'all be sure to stay tuned for that. Anyway, thanks again for tuning in, and I will see you in the Pokedex overhaul video for the region of Hoenn. See you then. Bye!